Welcome to Ask Sean, where I explore all sorts of questions about life, relationships, and being human. I'm Sean Slevin. I'm a licensed professional counselor and a licensed marriage and family therapist. And if you have an anonymous question that you'd like to send to me, you can go to www.asksean.org. So in this video is another segment from a recent interview, where I'm exploring arguments and the ways in which, it's really fascinating, the ways in which it can be hard to hear the other, in part because we're actually not hearing ourselves. So we might think that we know kind of why we're hurting or what we're upset about. And so we're kind of doubling down on trying to make them hear and get that. But in actuality, we're distancing ourselves perhaps from some deeper pain, which is really maybe more of what we need to be connected with and we need to be sharing and trying to talk about with our partner. And so, in this video, I kind of explore some of the nuances and aspects of that. Part of what makes arguments hard is that the fact that it's an argument means that on both sides, something sensitive is feeling threatened. And so there's a difficulty in kind of giving ground to one another. I think then part of what our responsibility to ourselves and to one another is to get clarity on what is it that feels so sensitive. What is it that's so tender that I'm willing to die on this hill, and then I'm losing the ability to hear the other person. I'm losing the ability to be curious about them, or to allow, kind of their perspective or their experience to matter too. And this is hard because it's hard for a lot of reasons. I mean, it takes us into vulnerability, like we've talked about earlier. And, we all tend to not want to be vulnerable. We want to just protect ourselves. It's also, I don't know, how would I put it? It's also hard because it's like I have to I have to allow myself to know myself a bit more deeply around something, Like in an argument, it's easy for things to kind of get reduced to these sort of simplified, well, you just da-da-da-da, or I can't understand how, whatever the thing is. It's not about the words, it's more about there's a feel to it where we sort of get really entrenched. But in that entrenchment, we're also losing connection with ourselves and well, what is it that's actually important to me here? Do I even care about the thing that I'm fighting about? Like a lot of times it's not about that. It's about something underneath of that. But I can't even let myself get close enough to that to be like, well, really, it's not that you went to the coffee shop. It's that I was feeling, really worried about this lab test, and I really needed to talk to you. Well, that's a whole different conversation. It's not about the freaking coffee shop, So I think, in terms of advice, I guess one piece of advice would be, are you even listening to yourself? Yes, we need to work towards listening to your partner and hearing them, right? Because if you're not hearing each other, if nobody's hearing each other, then nothing good is going to happen. And so people are like, well, I don't want to listen to them because they're not listening to me. But okay, fine. Well, are you listening to yourself? Do you actually know your own heart and what's really paining you here? What's the pain point that's being touched? Can you even name that? Can you get close to those tears? Or maybe you're someone for whom tears come easily. That doesn't always mean that you're actually getting close to the pain. Sometimes, so some of us, we can cry at the drop of a hat, but that actually can be a form of defense, we're not actually getting at the underlying, there's layers of tears, and it's well, so, are you actually getting underneath? And you'll know that you are because, in part because there'll be something in you that's ooh, that feels like I need to go there, but I also don't want to go there. There's a sense of you start to feel a little bit of impedance, a little bit of resistance internally, in which case it's oh, well, that's probably where you need to try to eventually at least go. Some part of your soul is crying out for your attention, and you're trying to work that out through your partner, through some disconnected thing that's like 6 layers removed, and how the hell are they supposed to know what that means? Because you don't even know, like. And I'm not letting anybody off the hook in terms of responsibility for jerky behavior. We all can be jerky, you know, so I'm not saying, you know, there can't be a scenario where like part of the argument is like someone did something hurtful. That still matters, but we can't have a constructive conversation around that if I can't even really get in touch with, well, what is it about this that's hard, you know, like. And for most of us, whatever our initial layer isn't the deepest layer, you know? So it's like, so that's maybe a good barometer. You may think, well, I know what it is. Well, I that's great. I still want you to go a layer deeper, at least one layer down. And realistically, there's probably a whole bunch of layers, but at least do the work of like being like, okay, what's underneath that? There's probably something underneath that. This crazy therapist with a beard says there's something underneath that. So like spend some time getting curious about that. And part of why that matters is because if you can practice starting to be curious about yourself, that's building a muscle that you need for also being curious about your partner. But if you're being like kind of closed and rigid with yourself, well, that's definitely what you're going to do with your partner. Like, so it's like, again, it's like can we at least practice with ourselves what we would like to be able to do with our partner? And if we can't even do that, well then, yeah, you're going to keep arguing, you know, like, because you don't have the muscles yet, you know, in which case, then you really should reach out for some help, you know, a therapist, somebody who's done this kind of work and who can guide you in building those muscles. Because what you don't want is you don't want to get entrenched in a pattern of continuing to avoid your stuff and being hurtful to each other, because then that does become increasingly really yucky and eventually toxic and can go bad in all sorts of ways. So, you know, I kind of general rule of thumb I suggest to folks is like, if you're having the same fight for like, you know, 30 days or more, like you should schedule a counseling session, because that's long enough to make a habit, right? Like, and so you know, really the thing is, if you've done it for 30 days, do you want to do it for the next 30 years? Because that's what you're setting yourself up for, you know, if you don't change something, you know. And the reality is it's going to require changes on both sides, you know, as much as we want to be like, well, they need to change something. Well, yeah, I'm sure they do. And so do you, like, because even if they change, your junk is still going to be there, like, and it will find another way to show up because it wants healing. It wants you to grow. Like, and so you will find another thing to be upset about. Like, and I don't mean that in a minimizing way, but just like, this is what our psyche does, you know, it's like, it finds things to shake us out of our stupor and say like, work on this stuff, work on these wounds that you've been ignoring for years. And it's, you know, it's partner relationships, because they're so important to us, are frustratingly great for that, for sort of being the place in which our psyche plays out that dynamic.